In 1900, a Siberian hunter named Semyon Terabikin moved carefully through the frozen wilderness near the Berezovka River, tracking faint signs of game across the endless permafrost. Suddenly, his dogs began to behave in a way he had never seen before. They were restless, agitated, almost frightened, as though they had sensed something unnatural hidden beneath the ice. Following their reaction, Terabikin approached a riverbank where the frozen ground had partially collapsed. From the exposed wall of earth protruded a massive curved tusk rising from the permafrost like a relic from another world. What he had found was far more extraordinary than a buried bone. Embedded in the frozen soil was the body of a woolly mammoth, preserved so completely that its skin still clung to its body as though death had arrived only moments earlier. News of the discovery quickly spread beyond the remote Siberian landscape and eventually reached the Russian Imperial Academy of Sciences. Recognizing the importance of the find, the Academy organized a full expedition and sent researchers deep into the frozen north to recover what would become one of the most famous and mysterious specimens ever discovered. When the scientists finally uncovered the mammoth in full, they found more than a remarkably preserved carcass. They found a moment apparently frozen in time. The animal's body was twisted and tense, its muscles locked in their final effort. But the most astonishing detail lay inside it. In the mammoth's mouth and stomach were fresh grasses and delicate buttercups plants associated with warmer conditions. These were not vague traces of vegetation. They were recognizable remains of its final meal, suggesting that the animal had been feeding shortly before it died. That detail transformed the discovery into a profound mystery. A creature weighing several tons does not normally freeze instantly. Even in severe cold, its body heat should take time to dissipate, allowing digestion and decay to continue. Yet this mammoth seemed to have been stopped in mid-action, its final meal still undigested, its tissues preserved in a way that implied something abrupt and catastrophic. Whatever had happened appeared to bypass the gradual processes of nature. It looked as though the animal had been overtaken by an event so sudden that its body never had time to follow the usual path from death to decomposition. As researchers continued studying what became known as the Berezovka mammoth, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. This was not an isolated body preserved in one unusual patch of frozen soil. Across Siberia, Alaska, and other Arctic regions, similar discoveries kept appearing. Mammoths, bison, horses, and rhinoceroses were being uncovered not merely as bones but as full or nearly full bodies preserved so vividly that they seemed to belong not to deep prehistory but to a recent past. Again and again, the same unsettling features appeared. Muscles frozen in tension, bodies halted mid-motion, no long signs of scavenging decay or disintegration. The pattern suggested interruption, as if whole lives had been cut off in an instant and then suspended. One of the most extraordinary human examples of this kind of preservation was discovered in southern Siberia, deep in the frozen ground of the Altai Mountains. There, Russian archaeologists excavated a burial mound that had remained frozen since the Iron Age. Inside, they found one of the best preserved prehistoric human bodies ever discovered, a woman now widely known as the Ice Maiden, or the Ukok Princess. Though she had been buried for more than 2,000 years, her body remained in astonishing condition. Her skin was still intact. Her body still carried elaborate tattoos depicting mythical creatures, flowing designs, and animal motifs, evidence of a highly developed artistic and symbolic culture. These tattoos, still visible after more than 2 millennia, are among the oldest ever found and offer rare insight into the spiritual and ceremonial world of her people. She was buried in fine clothing made from wool and silk materials that point not only to craftsmanship, but also to long-distance trade networks. She wore an elaborate tall headdress and was buried with grave goods that included food tools and 6 sacrificed horses. These details strongly suggest that she held a position of unusual status, perhaps as a priestess or spiritually important figure. Even her braided hair remained preserved, as did the carefully woven garments placed around her in the burial chamber. What made the discovery even more striking was the process by which her body had been preserved. Shortly after burial, the chamber appears to have filled with water, perhaps from melting snow or seasonal seepage. Then, under rare and very specific environmental conditions, that water froze solid. The ice remained stable for centuries, sealing her body away from oxygen, bacteria, and the normal progression of time. This was not merely preservation. It was suspension. There is no sign that the chamber thawed and refroze in cycles that would have allowed decay to begin. Instead, it became a closed pocket of history, shielded from the changing world above. Civilizations rose and fell, empires passed, climates shifted, and yet she remained in place beneath the ice as though the moment of her burial had never fully ended. The Ice Maiden raises the same unsettling question posed by the frozen animals of the north. What conditions are required to halt decay so completely that not only bone, but skin color, soft tissue, and fine detail survive almost intact? Whether by natural coincidence or by some process not fully understood, she stands as a human reflection of the same mystery seen in the Arctic, finds a life preserved not simply after death, but in a moment that was never allowed to fade. As researchers kept examining the frozen archives of the North, they found more evidence that seemed to challenge the idea of slow, predictable environmental change. In 2017, deep in the Sakha Republic of Siberia, locals exploring a region locked in thick permafrost uncovered something almost unbelievable: the preserved body of a Eurasian cave lion cub. Until then, this Ice Age predator had been known mainly through bones and scattered fossil remains. Now, for the first time, there was an animal so complete that it looked less like a prehistoric specimen and more like a sleeping creature placed gently into frozen ground. The cub, later named Sparta, is believed to have been only 1 or 2 months old at the time of death. Scientists suggested that a sudden mudslide may have opened beneath her, causing her to fall and become trapped. Buried quickly and sealed in freezing conditions, her body underwent a natural preservation process so effective that her fur, skin, teeth, and internal tissues remained in extraordinary condition. Researchers described her as the best preserved Ice Age animal ever discovered. The impression she created was deeply unsettling. She did not look like a fossil, she looked paused. Only a year later, the mystery deepened. A second cave lion cub, later named Boris, was found just 15 meters from the spot where Sparta had been uncovered. Yet radiocarbon dating revealed a remarkable fact: the two cubs were not from the same era at all. Sparta lived around 28,000 years ago, while Boris was more than 43,000 years old. These animals belong to one of the largest lion species ever to exist, creatures that once roamed the same harsh landscapes as reindeer horses and mammoths. Their extinction remains uncertain, though many scientists point to rapid environmental change. What makes these cubs so significant is not just their species, but their condition. Once again, a life seemed to have been frozen so completely that time itself appeared interrupted. Far to the east of Siberia's great rivers lies another place that has become central to these frozen mysteries: the Batagaika crater. This immense opening in the earth is not a conventional impact crater, but a vast collapse in the permafrost, a scar that keeps widening as ancient frozen layers are exposed for the first time. Within this expanding wound, researchers found one of the most astonishing specimens ever recovered: a prehistoric foal preserved so completely that scientists were able to extract actual liquid blood from its body. This young horse, estimated to be about 42,000 years old, belonged to the Lena horse, or Equus caballus linensis. It was only 1 or 2 weeks old when it died. Researchers believe it may have drowned in soft mud after the ground gave way beneath it. What followed seems to have been a nearly immediate freeze. The foal's body remained so intact that individual hairs, delicate tissues, and even traces of urine still present in the bladder survived. The most shocking detail was the liquid blood, the oldest liquid blood ever reported from such a specimen. Soft tissue preservation is already rare. The survival of liquid biological material pushes the limits of what most people consider plausible. It suggests conditions so rapid and so severe that decay barely had any chance to begin. The surrounding sediments seemed to hint at sudden movement in the landscape, as though the ground itself had shifted catastrophically. Yet even that explanation leaves major questions unanswered. What kind of event could bury an animal so quickly, freeze it so thoroughly, and preserve even its internal fluids for tens of thousands of years? Researchers have tried to go even further with this specimen. There have been efforts to recover viable DNA from preserved tissues, especially from muscle and organs, in hopes of one day cloning the species. The idea is ambitious: create an embryo using ancient genetic material and implant it into a modern horse. But the difficulty is enormous. DNA degrades over time, even in permafrost, And despite repeated efforts, scientists have struggled to recover genetic material of sufficient quality. Still, the work continues driven by the hope that extinction itself might one day be partly reversible. Among the Ice Age animals considered more realistic candidates for eventual revival is the steppe bison. In 2011, in the Yana Indigirka lowland region of Siberia, local inhabitants uncovered a steppe bison preserved in exceptional condition. Unlike ordinary fossil finds, this specimen retained soft tissues and internal structures seldom seen after such immense spans of time. Its body still held a heart-brain and digestive system. Although some organs had shrunk, the vascular structure remained remarkably preserved. The lack of fat around the abdomen led scientists to suspect starvation as a possible cause of death. Even so, the body was so complete that it became one of the most valuable steppe bison specimens ever studied. In 2022, researchers performed a necropsy on another steppe bison specimen dated to roughly 8,000 years ago. Its preservation was so extraordinary that some scientists suggested cloning might be possible if intact chromosomes could be extracted from skin muscle or wool. Compared with mammoths or cave lions, the steppe bison may represent a more practical target because of humanity's long familiarity with cattle breeding and bovine reproduction. What was once pure science fiction now sits, at least in theory, on the edge of scientific ambition. Another haunting discovery emerged in 2014 along the frozen banks of a remote Siberian river. As thawing ground exposed dark material along the river's edge, local hunters and researchers uncovered the body of a young woolly rhinoceros. It was later nicknamed Sasha. Its thick skin still covered the body, textured and largely intact with patches of fur clinging to its surface. The limbs remained clearly shaped. Because it had died young, its smaller body made the preservation even more visually striking. It looked less like an ancient carcass than like an animal asleep beneath the frost. Like the other specimens, Sasha seemed to have been sealed away with extraordinary speed. It was not simply preserved because of age-old cold. It looked as though it had been locked into frozen ground before the usual processes of decay could even begin. And this brings the question back again: what exactly caused so many of these events? Why do so many frozen discoveries suggest interruption rather than slow decline? What then could explain these extraordinary frozen discoveries? This is the point where conventional science and more speculative theories begin to separate sharply. Mainstream researchers usually frame these finds in terms of local burial conditions, rapid freezing permafrost stability mudslides, and environmental shifts over long periods of time. In many individual cases, that approach explains a great deal. But for those drawn to the broader pattern, it is not enough. The repeated image of large animals frozen in tension with soft tissue intact, and in some cases undigested food still present, invites more dramatic interpretations. One of the most controversial attempts to explain this pattern came from Immanuel Velikovsky. He proposed that Earth may once have experienced periods of extreme disturbance caused by close interactions with other celestial bodies. In his view, the planet's motion through space had not always been as stable as modern science assumes. Instead, he imagined a past in which enormous gravitational and electromagnetic disturbances could abruptly disrupt climate-atmospheric conditions, and even the rotation of the Earth. If such events had occurred, the consequences would have been immense. Winds of unimaginable force could have swept across continents. Oceans could have shifted violently. Temperatures in formerly temperate regions could have dropped with devastating speed. Animals grazing in open ground would have had no warning and no time to flee. They would have been caught exactly where they stood, their final movements preserved by a freezing process too sudden for ordinary biological decay to continue. This theory remains far outside mainstream scientific acceptance, but it continues to attract attention because it attempts to address one of the strangest features of the frozen discoveries: the apparent speed of preservation. The mammoths with fresh grasses in their stomachs, the animals frozen in motion, the soft tissues preserved in such detail, all of these seem, at least to some observers, too extreme to fit comfortably within gradualist explanations alone. Another theory, also controversial but highly influential in alternative circles, came from Charles Hapgood and was later discussed by Albert Einstein. This is the theory of crustal displacement. Unlike plate tectonics, which describes the slow movement of Earth's crust over immense geological time, crustal displacement imagines a far more sudden shift. According to this hypothesis, the outer shell of the Earth could move dramatically over the mantle in a relatively short period, relocating entire regions from temperate latitudes into polar conditions almost at once. If that had happened, the implications would be staggering. A region that had once supported grasses, flowering plants, and large grazing animals could suddenly become part of a frozen Arctic landscape. Climate would not cool gradually over generations. It would change violently fast enough to catch entire ecosystems unprepared. This idea appeals strongly to those who focus on the Berezovka mammoth and similar finds. If the area where such animals lived had once been warmer and then shifted abruptly into polar conditions, it might help explain why temperate vegetation appears inside animals now found in extreme cold. That theory also tries to account for another striking feature of the frozen finds: they do not tell stories of long decline. These animals do not look like creatures slowly adapting to worsening cold over many generations. They look interrupted. They look as though their world changed faster than life could respond. Of course, neither Velikovsky's planetary catastrophes nor Hapgood's crustal displacement theory is accepted as standard explanation within mainstream geology or paleontology. Both are considered speculative, and both have been criticized heavily. But they endure because they speak directly to a feeling these discoveries create. The preserved bodies do not feel like gentle history. They feel like evidence of suddenness. Whether or not the theories are correct, they are attempts to explain that emotional and physical impression. And that raises a larger question about the frozen record itself. Perhaps these theories are incomplete or overstated. Perhaps they are misguided efforts to explain what local geology climate cycles, permafrost, and rare burial conditions already can explain. Or perhaps they are touching, however imperfectly, on some deeper truth about Earth's past that is not yet fully understood. The discomfort they produce comes partly from what they imply about the future. If the planet has undergone rapid and catastrophic transformations before, could something similar happen again? That possibility is unsettling because it suggests change that does not unfold slowly enough for civilization to adapt. It suggests a crisis that would not arrive as a gradual trend, but as a violent shift. In such a scenario, the world's stability would prove far more fragile than it appears. If a sudden crustal displacement or an external planetary disturbance were ever possible, the first signs might not be subtle. The sky itself could change. Solar behavior, atmospheric patterns, and magnetic fields could become unstable. Navigation systems might fail. Communication networks might collapse. The ordinary rhythm of day and night could begin to feel uncertain. What starts as confusion could rapidly become global disorder. Then would come the physical consequences. Winds of extraordinary force might sweep across landscapes carrying debris, ice dust, and water. Oceans could move inland not just in isolated waves, but in sustained surges driven by planetary imbalance. Regions that are temperate today could experience catastrophic temperature drops in hours rather than over centuries. For living beings, the result would be immediate. There would be no slow migration, no orderly adaptation, no time to rebuild systems. Entire populations could be caught in motion in transit mid-action, just as the frozen animals of the north seem to have been. Modern civilization would be particularly vulnerable to that kind of event. Electricity transportation, supply chains, communications, and food distribution all depend on stability. They are built around the assumption that the planet changes slowly enough for human systems to adjust. A truly sudden shift would expose how dependent modern life is on continuity, and yet for all the drama of these possibilities, there is still no clear evidence that such a global event is imminent. This is important. These theories remain speculative. They live at the edge of scientific understanding rather than at its center, but the frozen record beneath the northern permafrost remains a reminder that Earth has undergone moments of extraordinary change before, whether local, regional, or global in scale. That may be the real power of these discoveries. They force us to confront a form of preservation so complete that it almost feels unnatural. The mammoth by the Berezovka River. The ice maiden sealed in frozen burial. Sparta, the cave lion cub. The foal from Batagaica with liquid blood. The steppe bison with organs intact. Sasha, the young woolly rhinoceros. Each one stands as a silent witness to some process that halted decay with startling efficiency. And that is why these finds remain so compelling. They do more than preserve lost animals and forgotten people. They preserve a question. Did these creatures simply die in unusually lucky local conditions, later protected by stable permafrost? Or are they fragments of a much larger story, one in which parts of the Earth changed faster and more violently than we usually imagine? The answer is still uncertain, but the frozen discoveries continue to challenge the comfort of gradual explanations. They suggest interruption, not only death, suspension, not only burial. A world in which some moments ended so abruptly that time itself seemed to stop. In the end, that is what makes these discoveries so haunting. They are not just ancient remains, they are preserved final moments. They show us that the Earth is capable of storing history in ways that feel almost impossible, keeping skin fur organs, tattoos blood, and even a last meal intact across thousands of years. Whether the cause was sudden local entombment, exceptional climate conditions, or some greater cataclysm, still debated at the edge of science, the result is the same. A record of lives cut short and sealed away before nature could finish its usual work. That is why the frozen world remains one of the deepest mysteries in archaeology and paleontology. Beneath the permafrost lie not only bodies but questions, and each time the thaw reveals another one, the old unease returns. What happened here? How fast did it happen? And if the Earth once had the power to stop life so suddenly, could it ever do so again?